Hi everyone, welcome to another executive interview. We're delighted to have Jennifer Chow, the Managing Director of Chimeric Therapeutics, returning for another insightful discussion. For those of you who joined us in the interview previously, you'll recall the remarkable work Chimeric is doing in the field of cancer treatment. And today we'll dive deeper into the recent developments surrounding CLTX CAR T therapy. Jennifer, it's a pleasure to have you again with us here today.
Thank you so much for them. It is wonderful to be back.
Amazing. Now, Jennifer, the recent ASX announcement highlighted an impressive 55% disease control rate for CLTX CAR T. So, can you explain what this actually means for potential patient outcomes and why investors should take note?
Yes, absolutely. So, to your point, Rhythm, it was a very exciting announcement that we made yesterday. The announcement was made on what you call our chlorotoxin CAR T, otherwise known as CHM 1101. And we were very excited. This is a phase 1A clinical trial data announcement, and that we announced that the results were very positive and encouraging from our perspective. The 55% disease control rate that you mentioned actually refers to how many patients achieve disease stability in the trial. And so at 55%, we find that very promising, and we're very delighted to see that, as we know that the historical analogs would suggest disease control rates of about 20 to 35%.
That's amazing. That's great, Jennifer. Now, the announcement also mentioned a median survival of around 10 months for patients who survive disease control. So, how significant is this outcome, and what does it signify for Chimeric Therapeutics in the cancer treatment market?
Yeah, I think when you think about glioblastoma, which is a type of brain cancer, and unfortunately the most deadly type of brain cancer, the overall survival that you expect for a patient when they're just diagnosed is about 15 months. When a patient actually is diagnosed, they'll have a first-line therapy. So the very first therapy that they get is called first-line therapy. When their disease comes back, and for most people the disease comes back somewhere around the 8-month mark, they move on to a second-line therapy, and then if it comes back again, a third-line therapy, and so on. So the patients that we actually treated in this clinical trial were heavily pretreated in late-stage patients. They actually were patients that were mostly in fourth and fifth line. So when the disease first comes back, you would expect to see survival maybe in the neighborhood of about 7 months. That's normally what we would expect. By fourth or fifth recurrence and fourth or fifth line treatment, obviously that is shortened. So with our clinical trial with CHM 1101, what we actually saw from a survival perspective for the patients that achieved disease control was 9.9 months, almost 10 months. So very encouraging for us, particularly in light of how heavily pretreated and later stage these patients were, and the analog sort of being, less than 7 months for that patient group. Even perhaps more exciting for us, and very notably, was there were 2 patients that really had enhanced survival. The first patient actually had survival to 19 months, which was very, very profound. And the second patient is at 14.4 months and remains alive in an ongoing follow-up. So really, the most important thing when we're doing these cancer trials is to be able to prolong someone's survival. So these were really meaningful outcomes for us.
Amazing. That's great to know, Jennifer. Now, moving on to another key point. So, one noteworthy aspect is the excellent safety profile of CLTX CAR T. So, can you dive into why this is essential for future clinical success?
Yeah, so this particular trial was a phase 1A trial. And a phase 1A trial is really what is also referred to as a first-in-human trial. So it's the very first time we take the drug and we put it into patients. And with that, our primary objective is to be able to establish safety. Right? We want to know with a new drug that we're putting into clinical trials that it's safe for patients. So what we saw from a safety perspective in this trial, again, was very promising. We saw no dose-limiting toxicities, no cytokine release syndrome, no tumor lysis, and generally a very manageable safety profile. So this was really important to establish because it was the primary objective of the trial, but it's also really important to know when you're talking about a disease where the prognosis is so poor, that you're not making someone's quality of life worse. So for us, in terms of taking this forward, this safety profile actually gives us the foundation to be able to say, okay, we now know we have a good safety profile and we can move the drug forward into further clinical development.
That's brilliant. Now, as we move forward, you talked about phase one. So now moving to phase 1B clinical trial, which is the next step. So can you outline the goals and expectations for this phase and how it could impact the company's growth?
Absolutely. So now we get into the exciting part where we continue to advance clinical development beyond this first phase where we're really looking for safety. Essentially, what you look for in clinical development, or what happens in clinical development, is you go from the phase 1A to the 1B, you move into phase 2, and then for a lot of assets, you have to go into phase 3 before you can apply to regulators to commercialize the therapy. With our therapy, we've already done the phase 1A, so we're now moving into phase 1B. And essentially what we're referring to that is the expansion cohort. Within this clinical trial, we'll look at another 12 to 25 patients or so. And what we're really looking to do here is confirm the efficacy signal that we saw. So we'll treat additional patients. We'll really look to make sure that the safety is still there, but that we have that efficacy signal. And once we complete that, we're able to go to the regulatory authorities and talk to them about designing a registration trial. With cell therapies, what we've actually seen historically is all the cell therapies that have been approved to date have not had to go to phase 3. They've actually been able to be approved on phase 2 clinical data. So that will be our objective, is to be able to go to the regulators after the phase 1B clinical trial is complete, have a conversation with them about designing a trial that would allow us to be able to register and commercialize the drug.
Amazing, very exciting indeed.
Yeah.
Now, looking ahead, so what is the company's strategy and timeline for further development and regulatory approval, and what should investors be watching out for?
Yeah, with CHM 1101, so obviously the next phase is going to be going into this phase 1B trial. And phase 1B trials, are about 12 to 25 patients, and then you have your negotiations or your discussions with your regulatory authorities, and then you move into the actual registration trial. So that would be sort of the next steps for CHM 1101, and we'll be looking to advance that as quickly as we can so we can get this drug out to patients. In terms of the rest of our portfolio and pipeline, we actually have 4 ongoing clinical trials right now, Rhythm, with all of our assets, which is keeping us busy. And so, similarly with our other assets, we have the same strategy. We're really looking to focus on clinical development, to advance it as quickly and as robustly as we can, so we can move all of our drugs towards those value realization points.
Amazing. Sounds very exciting indeed. Now, considering these groundbreaking developments, how do you envision Chimerix's position in the field of cell therapy, and what excites you the most about the company's future?
It's a wonderful question, Rhythm. I actually believe right now we have a very advanced pipeline and portfolio. We've been very strategic about the assets that we've brought into the company, and we've been very strategic about how we are prioritizing the development of those assets. So I think what really excites me is moving these assets towards those realization points, not just for investors, but also for patients.
Yeah.
And, for us, we know nowadays in the market that those value realization points where you may get a big pharma interest or a merger and acquisition interest are really only coming with clinical data. So that's really the exciting point for us is that development and continuing the clinical trials so that we're able to actually bring value realization to both investors and patients.
Amazing. Well, Jennifer, thank you so much for sharing these wonderful insights about Chimeric and the work that you and your team are doing. For anyone who would like to get in touch with the team at Chimeric, please see the details at the side of the screen or in the description of this video. Once again, thank you, Jennifer, for joining me for this insightful discussion.
Thank you so much for having me, Rhythm.
Thank you.